Well, hi, it's me, Bill Sydnor, author of the Mitchell's Magical Day series, outside today to share with you a new story from Tales. I've got a couple of them here. We've done a couple of these already on video. We've done Mitchell's Magical Day with Frank and Ivy Stranahan and Mitchell's Magical Day on the New River. We have a few more to do. But today I want to focus on the Bonnet House. Have you been to Bonnet House? What a lovely place. It's a perfect day for me to be sitting outside talking to you about a very special place. And we're going to get started. And I want to show you the cover of the Mitchell's book that we're going to be talking about. This is Mitchell's Magical Day at Historic Bonnet House. And I'm just holding up a picture rather than the actual cover of the book because I'm outside. And here's a little picture of a couple of monkeys on top of the boathouse at Bonnet House. I think if you go to Bonnet House, you might see those very same monkeys. So let's get started. Sorry, having a bit of trouble in this wind. Well, here we go. You know the stories about Mitchell and his magical binoculars, and I brought them with me so you could see them. These are the binoculars that are featured in each of the stories, and of course, they're going to be featured in this one too. Mitch rode his bike as fast as he could along the street, over the curb, and across the sidewalk. He coasted through the backyard and jumped off before the bike came to a stop. "Mom! Mom!" he yelled as he burst through the kitchen door. He pulled something out of his book bag before letting it plop onto the floor. "I'm here, Mitchell." "Hey, Mom, will you sign this?" Mitch panted as he wiped his brow with one hand and waved a paper with the other. His mother was sitting at the dining room table, which was covered with books and papers. She was working on her nursing degree and spent a lot of time studying, which of course you would have to do, wouldn't you? "Mitchell, what's all the rush? What is it, dear?" She closed a very thick book with a thud. "Goodness, you're all out of breath. How about a glass of juice, and then you tell me about your day?" She got it from the table and headed for the refrigerator. "We're going on a field trip this Friday. I've got to go. Mrs. Jennings says I can. My grades are up. Please, Mom, can I?" Mom followed his mother into the kitchen, still carrying the paper. "You have to sign this permission slip." "Well, now, Mitchell, I don't have to sign anything. But let's have a look." Mitch handed her the paper as he was still panting like a puppy. "I don't know. Where's your class going?" "Well, I'm not sure either. A house somewhere. Boggett House or Boppet House? It doesn't matter. It's a day away from school." "Mitchell, it says right here, Bonnet House. Bonnet House Museum and Gardens. Oh, I've been there many times. You're going to love it. There's so much to see." She flattened the paper on the counter. "Would you get a pen?" "Going on a field trip to Bonnet House." "Well, that's great. When are you going?" Papa asked as he sank into his favorite green leather chair. Mitch darted to his side. "Well, I sure like to see that place again," he said. "It's been a long time since I was there." "Dad, maybe they need chaperones," Mitch's mother interjected. "I'm sure Mrs. Jennings could use help keeping Mitch and the rest of the class in order." She chuckled aloud. "Why don't I ask her tomorrow? Wouldn't that be special? My two men going off on an adventure together." Well, the school bus rumbled across the gravel drive and parked near the entrance to Bonnet House. It sounded like an orchestra of mismatched, untuned instruments, with everyone chattering away, each kid louder than the next. I'll bet you know what that's like. "We're here," Billy chirped as he stuck his head out the window. The other kids started lining up in the aisle. "Come on, Billy and Mitch." They had been best friends since first grade, and here's a picture of the school bus getting ready to take them, or has taken them, to Bonnet House. They did everything together and always sat at the back of the bus on field trips. It was fun, but it meant they were the very last to get off. "Stand with your partners," Mrs. Jennings instructed as everyone gathered, "and stay together as a group. No wandering off." Just then a large green car pulled in next to the bus. "Pop-Up!" Mitch yelled. "Hey, Pop-Up, over here. We're over here." Mitch couldn't have been more excited that Pop-Up had arrived. "We're so glad you could join us," Mrs. Jennings said as she extended her hand to Pop-Up. "Mitch has told us so much about you. He thinks you're pretty special." Pop-Up smiled proudly. "Well, I think he's very special too," he replied as he winked at Mitch. The class began walking the long pathway to the Welcome Center, which was nearly hidden by red mangroves and piney woods. Off in the distance, a raccoon watched carefully. Mitch could hear rustling in the trees, but he didn't know what was making the sound. Psst, psst. There's that sound again, Mitch said to himself. Are there snakes around here? He looked down at his feet. Gosh, I hope not. He watched each step very carefully. Hey, Billy, do you think there are snakes around here? Sure there are, Billy replied. A place like this? There are bound to be snakes, ring snakes, grass snakes. Billy knew a lot about snakes. But they won't hurt you. I mean, I doubt we'll see a rattler. With that, both of Mitch's feet left the ground. Here they are, beginning to walk the trail at Bonnet House. There it is again. Do you hear it? Psst, psst. Just then, a hand landed on Mitch's shoulder. He let out a yelp and nearly jumped out of his skin. It's just me, boy, Pop-Up said, with a slight laugh. Don't be scared. Listen, Mitchell, I wanted to give you these, but I didn't want to make a fuss in front of your friends. He handed Mitch a worn leather case with a silver clasp and a long strap. Go on, take a look. Mitch slowly opened the case and removed an old pair of binoculars. They were heavy, painted dull black with some brass showing through. These were my Pop-Up's binoculars, and that's what the story is based on. If you look carefully, you'll see things other people can't see. And here we have a picture of Pop-Up handing Mitch those very special binoculars. I've had these since I was your age, Pop-Up continued. I've taken them on many journeys. Mitch held the binoculars to his eyes and scanned the field where the school bus was parked. It appeared to be right next to him. Look carefully, Mitchell. If you do, you'll see things other people can't see. You'll have quite an adventure. We're going to find out, aren't we? Good morning, children. Good morning, a voice called. I'm Mrs. Schuyler, and I'll be your tour guide today. The students gathered around. I'm glad you came to visit us. Bonnet House is a unique place, and I guarantee you're going to be seeing some very interesting things. Like snakes? Mitch blurted out. Well, maybe. Some of the children gasped. We do have snakes on the property, but I doubt we're going to see any of them, Mrs. Schuyler replied calmly. They tend to stay back in the wooded areas. They're actually afraid of us humans. We make too much noise for them. Whew, Mitch thought, as he let out a deep sigh. He didn't find snakes as fascinating as Billy did. He and Billy followed the group along a plank deck over to the lagoon. Look, Billy, crabs, lots of crabs and fish. See, a whole school, which was dangling over the narrow wooden railing a few inches from going over the edge, binoculars and all. Pop-Up grabbed hold of his belt loop and yanked him back onto the deck. And here is Mitchell at that boathouse. Well, you can't see him. You have to use your imagination. But that is the Bonnet House boathouse. Bonnet House is a very special property, Mrs. Schuyler continued as they walked past the pond. See this pond, students? It was once part of a 6-mile coastal dune lake that was filled with rain and runoff. In fact, nowhere along our east coast can you find fresh water this close to the ocean. The children listened carefully as graceful swans swam by, leaving tiny ripples behind them. This fresh water was very important to our sailors and our settlers. And there you can see Bonnet House in the distance, the beautiful lagoon, and the swans. Is the ocean near here? Mitch called. Will we see it? I'm sure we will, Mrs. Schuyler replied. In fact, we're going to take a brief tour of the property before we see the house. If you follow me, I'll lead you to a ridge where we can see the Atlantic Ocean. She led the group up a low hill along a pathway made of sand and pieces of shell. There are so many trees and bushes, the sun could barely get through. And I'm going to tell you, I'm outside and the sun is barely getting through. I'm getting a little sprinkled on. We're standing in a hardwood hammock. It's like a tropical forest. Here the trees grow close together and the branches create a canopy. The name hammock was used by sailors as far back as the 1500s to describe a tree-covered island that could be seen from the horizon. Look there, Mrs. Schuyler directed as she pointed ahead. That's the Atlantic Ocean, due east. A few children rushed over to see. And here's a picture. Now, this isn't a great picture, but I'm going to show you this picture of the hammock, the stand of trees that is right up against the beach at Bonnet House. There's a road now that cuts through A1A, but back in the day, when sailors came, of course, there were no roads then. The ridge looked over a roadway and onto the beach. Sunlight danced atop the waves. A cargo freighter slowly made its way south to the horizon. Cars buzzed on the busy road. Bonnet House is a barrier island, Mrs. Schuyler stated. A barrier island is a narrow section of land separated from the mainland by a body of water. This barrier island separates the Atlantic Ocean and the Intercoastal Waterway. The barrier islands are very vulnerable. These trees have protected Bonnet House from many hurricanes through the years. In fact, this piece of land has some great stories to tell. Shipwrecks, pirates, pioneers, Indians. They were all here at some point in the past. She gave the children a few minutes to explore the area and to take some pictures. "Come on, Billy," Mitch called as he made his way ahead of the others. He wanted a good view of the beach. I'm waiting to see if the rain's going to come down a little heavier. Billy pushed through the branches and making his way through the woods. "Look, there's a cargo ship." Mitch pulled out Pop-Up's binoculars from their case. Here's the case, by the way. It's pretty old, isn't it? He slowly turned to show Pop-Up, but Pop-Up was already starting back down the path with with all the other students, Mrs. Schuyler and the other students. "Mitch, we've got to go," Billy warned. "They're leaving us." Mitch ignored him and held the binoculars up to his eyes. "Just give me a minute. I want to see something." He rotated the focusing knob, which is right here. There's the focusing knob. "I'll be right there." Slowly, the shoreline came into focus. There were a few sunbathers, a jogger, a small sailboat, but then things started to go out of focus. "What's going on?" Mitch said under his breath as he fiddled with the focus. His view shifted. The scenery transformed. Now the beach was overgrown with thick vegetation. There were no cars, no people, just wilderness. And here's Mitchell looking out at the beach with his binoculars, trying to figure out what is going on. Things are changing right before his eyes, but through the binoculars. "Hear me! Who goes there?" "Did I hear a voice?" asked a man with a heavy accent. "Indeed, answer me. Be you friend or foe, no matter. Answer me." Mitch was startled. He took a few steps closer toward the water, past a clump of palmetto bushes. Suddenly, a hand reached out. "There is someone there. I knew it. Sure as I breathe, I knew it." Who do you claim to be?" Mitch stood motionless as the man crawled from the brush. He was sunburned and unwashed. His clothing was in tatters. Mitch also noticed he had no shoes. I'm Mitch," he stuttered nervously. He turned for help from Mrs. Jennings, but she was nowhere in sight. "I'm here with my class and my Pop-Up. They're all here somewhere." He searched all around for some trace of them. "Mitch it is. And from which vessel are ye?" "Vessel? What vessel?" "Ship, then," the man barked as he waved his arms. "Tell me the name of your ship. How was she lost? How long ago?" I didn't have a," Mitch stammered awkwardly. "Just a bus. We came on a bus," he muttered under his breath. "Ah, well then, where is she, lad? We might need her." "Where is what? We might need what?" "Your old bussy, your blunderbuss. Fancy coming upon you with a gun. Do you have powder, too?" A wide smile revealed the stranger's broken teeth. "We could do with powder in shots if you were to survive." And here's the blunderbuss he's talking about. This is a gun that was used in this time and sometimes called a bussy. So Mitch got confused between the school bus and what this man is asking for. "A bomber bus?" he said. "What's a bomber bus?" "No, sir. I meant a school bus. I came on a school bus with my teacher and friends. It's parked in the field just past those trees." Mitch squirmed and began to retreat. "Aye, don't try your games with me. Show me your weapons, son. We have to work together, we do, or neither of us will come through this." He moved toward Mitch. "I intend to do you no harm. He won't lay a hand on you, but there are others who will. Surely now, boy, show me your gun." "Really, sir, I have no gun. I have nothing but these." Mitch held up the binoculars. "No gun? Why then, son, did you want to tell me you had a blunderbuss? To frighten me? To step me down? Of course, 'twas a sailor's bluff. A half pint you are, but smart, sharp as a cutlass." The stranger sat down in the warm sand. "Do you know what a cutlass is?" "It's a sword." "Live around here? Ha, you might as well call it such." "I'm lucky to be alive at all," the man continued. He lifted a torn pant leg to reveal a large wound festering and covered with gnats. "Took fire to me leg and me hand days ago." He then held up his hand, showing a crude bandage made from fabric torn from his shirt. "I'd wager I lost a fifth of blood, maybe more." "What happened? Who shot you?" Mitch exclaimed as he tried to retreat into the bushes. Why would someone shoot you? Are you a burglar or something? No, my name's Eliezer Weiler. I'm off the brig, Alna. Call me Lee, most do. No, son, I'm no criminal. Sailor's honor. Okay, Mitch slowly extended his hand to Lee. I'm Mitchell Allen Andrews. You can call me Mitchell. Mitch. Hey, Lee, where is your ship? Where is the Alna? Oh, she's gone, son. Wrecked. I entered her final day into her ship's log. September 7th, 1838. We was coming up the coast from Cuba, making our way back to Boston, when a nor'easter caught us. 'Twas a gale, it was. The sea grew large. She washed over Alna's deck, and the wind ripped her sails like tissue paper. Our Captain Thomas did his best to keep her bow windward, but the storm was too strong for her. Sorry, the wind's catching up with me. She was about to breach. We were certain of that. She was going to roll right over on her side. Cap led her to the shoreline so we could disembark for safety, but our Anna, she was done for, torn asunder. Mitch listened intently from his hiding spot in the bushes. We stayed ashore with the wreckage for a few days, gathering provisions from Alna, but it wasn't safe. No, sir, we wasn't safe by anyone's point of view. And here's a picture of the Alna. Now, I'm going to admit this is probably not the Alna. This is an old shipwreck picture I found to use, but I think it looks very similar to what the Alna may have looked like, the ship that wrecked right off the coast of Bonnet House. Is that how you got hurt? Did someone on Alna shoot you? Mitchell asked. No, son, I wasn't hurt in the wreck. We crew look out for one another. We're like brothers. But once we was ashore, it happened. One day near noon, the first of the Indians appeared just past those trees. Lee pointed to the south. They was carrying rifles. We wasn't sure what their intentions were until I heard a crack and heard me mate, Andrew Pelmer, yell in pain. He'd been shot in the gut and fell quickly. He was dead just that quick. Then another crack came from behind a tree. That shot was meant for me, Lee explained as he reached toward his wounded leg. The other mate, Camet, and Captain Thomas took to the beach with them Indians in fast pursuit. Cap was just a few paces ahead of me when he slowed from exhaustion. Sudden like, a ball came whizzing by me and caught him in the back. He went down fast, flat on his face. Camet and I kept running, but I was so weak, and I was losing blood. I dove into the brush to hide. Mitch could feel his heart racing against his ribs. He had forgotten all about his friends. Then what happened, he gasped. Camet, he were far ahead of me. I lost total sight of him. He likely figured I was dead too, like Cap and Andrew. Things was looking real bad for me, real bad. But once I was sure those Indians has gone, I made my way back up here. But why? Mitchell questioned. Why would the Indians want to attack you? Well, you see, it were your President Andrew Jackson's idea. He's to blame. He insisted that all the Indians be removed from the government-owned land. It's called the Indian Removal Act, passed back in 1830. Yes, we heard there'd be trouble if we was to make port in Florida on our way to Cuba. We'd been warned. We was told if a sailor or soldier sets foot on Florida soil, he may never be seen again. So once we was ashore, I came to expect the Indians would think we was soldiers coming for their capture. And here's a picture of the Seminoles firing guns at, we can suppose, or use our imaginations, that they're shooting guns at this shipwrecked sailor from the Alna. And this really did happen. Mitch's mind was racing. 1838, Indians on the beach. He said to himself, where am I? Soon Lee interrupted his thoughts again. Look, son, if we are to survive, we must find shelter from the Indians. They'll be back for us. And water, we must have water. I've had no food or water since we abandoned Alna. We must find water soon, or we'll surely die here. Lee lowered his head. Hey, Lee, I know where there's some water. All the water you can drink, Mitch exclaimed, and it's not very far from here. No, son, no, a body can't drink seawater. It dries you up from the inside out till you haven't a drop to spit. Stay clear from drinking ocean water. No, Lee, really, I know where there's drinking water. I saw it. Do you now, boy, do you? I've heard of men marooned on this coast that met their death from dehydration. And you're here to tell me you have a secret source of water? Lee shook his head in disbelief. Come on, follow me, Mitch instructed as Lee stood slowly. He was clearly hanging on by a thread. He needed to get some water fast. Together they headed away from the shoreline, up a low hill and through some brush. It's just past here. I learned about it this morning from our tour guide, Mitchell said excitedly. Lee limped along, his feet cut, his leg swollen. What tour guide might that be? The navigator from your ship? You never did tell me the name of your ship. Was she a schooner? A brigantine? Maybe that gale claimed your ship, just like the gale that claimed Alna. Mitch stammered. He began thinking about Mrs. Schuyler and all the others. Where were they, he wondered. Just follow me. He led Lee through the thick palmetto brush to the pond he had seen earlier. Look, there it is, just like I said. Lee knelt down at the water's edge and cupped his hand. Do you know where they are? They're at the lagoon at Bonnet House, but long before Bonnet House was built, of course. Well, I'll be. Are you sure it's sweet water? He raised some to his face and smelled it. Sweet? Mitch asked, like soda? He knelt down next to Lee and scooped up some of the water with his hands. Just regular old water, I think. Meanwhile, Lee was lapping it up as fast as he could. Yup, it's sweet water. You found us fresh water. No brine at all. It's near a miracle, boy. We've got hope now, we do. He drank a bit more, then washed his face. You see, in the day, sweet water was referred to any water that was not salt water. So if there was fresh water available in a lake or a lagoon, it was called sweet water. And actually, outside of Miami, there's a town called Sweetwater because there was a spring or a source of fresh water in that area. Oh, my friend Mitch, if it weren't for you, I'd surely be a dead man. I only hope Camet finds water for himself before it's too late. And again, here's that lagoon at Bonnet House. That lagoon was there, and the soldiers were able to get some fresh water. Mitch, gosh, Mitch, what are you doing? Do you think that water's safe to drink? It was Billy. He was standing next to Mitch, watching him cupping the pond water in his hands. Ick! Stop drinking that. Come on, Mrs. Jennings sent me to get you. We're over by the house. Mitch stood up. He looked at Billy. He looked all around him. Lee was gone. Where'd he go? We got to get him some help. Here's a little drawing of Billy and Mitch. And Mitch is down, still drinking the water, because in his mind, the shipwrecked sailor is there, and he's trying to help him. He's trying to help Lee. Get help for who? Lee Schuyler from the Anna. You know, he's hurt pretty bad. He needs water. Who? What? Somebody's hurt? Billy looked puzzled. So where is he? Mitch looked around. Well, he was here, and all this area was wooded, and Lee was stranded from a shipwreck. And then Indians attacked him and his crew, which could tell by Billy's face that he wasn't buying any of it. And well, you know, yeah, I got you. Just kidding. It's an April Fool's joke, Billy. Mitch, you're a little late. Today is May 4th. Billy muttered as he led Mitch along a path to the Bonnet House, where everyone was gathering in the courtyard. Mrs. Jennings cast a disapproving scowl at Mitch when she saw him. Pop-Up slowly walked over. Mitchell, where have you been hiding? Don't you want to hear about this place, he whispered. There's a lot to learn here. But Pop-Up, I met a stranded sailor, Lee Schuyler. His ship Alma was wrecked and he was chased by Indians. He could have died. And I showed him where there was fresh water. His voice grew louder. His words came faster. His breath came shorter. And he was over there, Mitch pointed to the beach. He was. Someone surely has a great imagination, Mrs. Schuyler said as she walked past them. You should be an artist. Or better yet, a storyteller. You have a very creative mind, Mitchell. But I did see him pop up with my own eyes, and with these. Pop-Up looked and winked at Mitchell. He knew there was something special about these binoculars. Isn't this a special place, Mrs. Schuyler asked. Bonnet House is built around this beautiful courtyard. It was designed by Frederick Bartlett, an artist from Chicago. Mr. Bartlett was married to Helen Birch, the daughter of Mr. Hugh Taylor Birch. She scanned the group of students. Have any of you been to Birch State Park? Have you been to Birch State Park? Lovely place to go. A few children raised their hands, including Rachel. She stood on her toes to raise her hand the highest. I'll bet she's never even been there, Mitch chirped to Billy. She tells people she's been everywhere. Billy nodded in agreement. And here's Mrs. Schuyler. Mrs. Schuyler is at Bonnet House almost every day. And here she is with a group of students. And Rachel is trying to get her attention. Well, Birch Park is just across the road north of Bonnet House. Mr. Birch gave this property, all 35 acres, to his daughter Helen and Mr. Bartlett as a wedding gift. Isn't that a nice wedding present? A beautiful piece of land right on the ocean. Mitch and Billy didn't care too much about weddings, but Rachel seemed to. So they got married right here, she asked, flipping her hair to one side with a twist of her head. No, this property was all wilderness at that time. The house had not been built yet. Construction on Bonnet House began in 1920, Mrs. Schuyler continued. Oh, yeah, that's right, Rachel chirped. She hated to be wrong. She flipped her hair around and pretended to be paying attention to something else. I think maybe that was Rachel's attitude. Mr. Bartlett was a very successful artist in Chicago, where he built a large home called Dorford House. He decorated Dorford House with beautiful murals and whimsical trompe-l'oeil paintings. Trompe-l'oeil. Trompe-l'oeil is a way of painting that fools us into thinking that objects in the painting are real. And here's an example of one of Frederick's trompe-l'oeil paintings. And he's trying to give you the idea that something is really going on there, that something is real. Trompe-l'oeil means to fool the eye. When Mr. Birch gave this property, Mr. Bartlett designed Bonnet House with a studio where he could paint and a music room where Helen could compose. And just as he had done at Dorford House, he added his own unique murals and decorations. He even painted murals on the ceiling. If you go to Bonnet House, this is a mural that you can see at the top. See that spiral staircase in the bottom corner? And at the top of that spiral staircase is that mural painted on the ceiling with all the beautiful leaves. Very clever man. Mr. Bartlett was so inspired by the land Mr. Birch had given to Helen and him that he created many unique forms of artwork here. Come on, I'll show you some more examples. By the way, the rain has stopped. The group followed Mrs. Schuyler along the walkways, which formed a perimeter around an open courtyard. Mitch lagged behind the others, staring off in the distance. Midge, come on, let's go, Billy said as he poked Mitch with his elbow. Okay, go on. I'll catch up with you in a minute. Looks like trouble might be coming. Mitch stood in the pathway and held the binoculars to his eyes, hoping to see all the way to Birch State Park. There were trees, tall buildings in the way. He spotted a traffic light and an entrance road. That might be it, he said to himself. But soon, the image in the binoculars began to change. The buildings and the roads disappeared, and in their place were trees and sandy paths. Uh-oh, Mitch thought. He kept looking, searching for something familiar. There wasn't anything there. Everything had changed. Suddenly, he spotted a tall man walking with a girl along a narrow path. I wonder who that could be. Good morning, the man called out. See anything interesting? Well, I did see things. I saw some trees. Mitch turned around thinking he'd better get back to Bonnet House. Uh-oh, where'd it go? Where'd what go? The man asked. He was tall and thin with a bushy beard. Along him stood a young woman with dark hair. The house. There was a house here, Mitch sighed. Yes, you're right. There was, but it was moved some time ago, long before your time. Moved? Moved where? I'm Hugh Birch, the man interjected. Allow me to introduce my daughter, Helen. Mitch stared in confusion as Helen smiled. Now you tell us who you are. Well, Mitch struggled to clear his head. I'm Mitchell Allen Andrews, sir, he replied as he shook Mr. Birch's hand. I'm here I came to see the house. The house moved? It really moved? When? Well, let's see. It's been about 15 years now. The House of Refuge was built back in 1876, back when Cunningham owned this land. I guess they didn't know it was private land, so they had to move it in 1891. It's a few miles south of here, near the inlet where the old fort stood. They moved the entire House of Refuge by rolling it on logs. Imagine that. Mr. Birch let out a hearty laugh. Here's a picture of Hugh Taylor Birch leaning up against a tree. And the House of Refuge was moved on logs at that time. We're going to learn more about that. House of Refuge, Mitchell asked. Here? But I thought this was the Mr. Birch cut Mitch off mid-sentence. Well, it wasn't exactly here on this very spot. It used to be over there. He pointed toward the beach. On the shore, of course, a few degrees east by northeast. On the shore, so sailors could find it easily and get assistance. This coast was a terrible place to be marooned, stranded by shipwrecks. I imagine it happened to plenty of men, though, through the decades. Like Lee, Mitch exclaimed. Lee and his mates. You know, Lee Schuyler. Well, I don't know a Lee. Have you heard of a Lee, Helen? He asked his daughter. She shook her head no. Lee was shot by Indians, Mitch added. Here? Recently? No, you must be a bit confused. This is 1918. There haven't been any skirmishes here for more than 75 years. The Indians haven't staked out this area since the last Florida War. Let's see, that would be around the mid-1840s. But it was those very skirmishes that led the government to build those houses of refuge in the first place. About every 25 miles along the coast. You see, once Major Lauderdale's fort was abandoned in 1842, there wasn't much hope for anyone whose ship foundered here. They all faced dehydration and starvation and sun exposure and Seminole attacks. Mitch listened carefully. So the house of refuge was built after the men on the Alma were attacked, he muttered under his breath. Mr. Birch didn't hear him. Of course, for many years after the Florida Wars, the only structure along the beach were the houses of refuge and the old fort. And the only people you were likely to come across were the keeper of the house and a few maroon sailors. Oh, and the Barefoot Mailman. The mailman went barefoot? Didn't he have any shoes? Mitch asked with astonishment. Helen let out a laugh as she covered her mouth with her hand. Well, I think he had shoes. He just didn't want to wear them and get them full of sand. You see, it was hard to get the mail delivered here. There was no railroad then and no reliable transportation by ship. The mail was carried by a man on foot. Sometimes the mailman had to travel more than 100 miles from north of Palm Beach to Key Biscayne, some of it in small boats. He mostly walked the beach. It took him 3 or 4 days in each direction. Well, I heard it could take 2 months to receive a letter. Can you imagine waiting 2 months to get your mail? Did you ever see the Barefoot Mailman, Helen? Did he bring mail to you? Mitch asked. Was he carrying his shoes in his hands? No, Mitch, I never saw him, she replied, but I've heard of him. The Barefoot Mailman is a legend around here. Mr. Birch explained, by the time I got here in 1893, the job of the Barefoot Mailman was just about finished. I never laid eyes on him. In fact, within a short time, Henry Flagler's railroad was bringing the mail to the downtown station up the river. Mr. Birch motioned to the west. The train has changed everything, not all of it for the better. Helen's eyes met her father as he continued talking. You see, when I arrived here, it was by accident. I was sailing south for Coconut Grove when I got caught up in a storm. Here's where I landed. Here's where I stayed. There weren't many folks living here, I can tell you, just a few farmers west of here. And that's the way I liked it. I prefer to be alone. I don't want lots of people around me to spoil things. Roads and trains and buildings, fearful changes. Mr. Birch turned away and stared off into the distance. I bought about 500 acres back in '02, he continued. It's been a great deal of work to make this place anyone's idea of paradise. I had to clear a great deal of land, drain it, fill it with muck drained from the canals. I didn't care much for living in a mangrove swamp. Not a bit. I had a vision for my own land. And this is a picture of kind of how the mangroves had taken over the land at that time. There was nothing around really, and you had to find a way to make a living and build a house on that swampy mess. Big Boss, as I call my father, this is Helen speaking, and I travel abroad often. We always bring back tropical plants for our property, Helen added. We love to see which ones will survive and thrive. Father is a good friend, David Fairchild of Miami, whose botanical knowledge is so important to us. He too collects all varieties of tropical plant life. Helen's voice was clear and soft. Have you heard of Fairchild Gardens in Miami? Well, that gentleman was a friend of Hugh Taylor Birch. Helen lost her mother, Maria, a few years back, Mr. Birch explained. I brought her here to get her mind off things. She took to the place right away, but now she has much more to look forward to. She's engaged to be married to a very fine man, Mr. Frederick Clay Bartlett. Mr. Birch extended his hand to Helen, who clasped it between hers. Helen loves him, and I admire him. He's a man of accomplishment. Helen began to smile. And I have told him that my wedding gift to the couple will be a house lot right here on the beach. Of course, Mr. Bartlett asked what I meant by house lot, and I told him, well, about as far as you can swing a cat. Mr. Birch laughed heartily. Oh, Big Boss, really, there'll be no swinging of cats, Helen chided. Frederick and I have grand plans for the land. He's drawing up plans for a house right now. I know you'll be pleased with the results. It's going to be beautiful, truly beautiful. And that's Helen talking about what's going to become of the property and the beautiful bonnet house that will be built. And this is Helen Birch, Hugh Taylor Birch's daughter. Mitch heard footsteps and turned around. It was his class again, walking down the sandy path. He turned back toward Helen and Big Boss, Mr. Birch. They were gone. Look, Mrs. Jennings, look at Mitchell. He's not coming with us. It was Rachel again. She loved getting kids in trouble. Do you want me to go get him? I'll go get him and bring him back to you, she cackled. Mitchell, over here with the rest of the group. Find your partner, Mrs. Jennings called from across the pathway. Okay, I'll be right there, Mitch replied. Just as soon as He held the binoculars up again to see what he could see. He slowly scanned the beach, and he saw a mailman with no shoes. He slowly walked off the path toward the beach, but stopped when he began to lose focus. The image in the binoculars grew fuzzier and fuzzier. I knew it, Mitch exclaimed. Hey, Pop-Up, come quick, come look. Mitch turned toward his class, but he couldn't find any of them. He couldn't even find the house. He decided to peer through the binoculars again. Okay, let's see. I have something here for Mr. Cunningham. Are you his kin? I don't remember seeing you around here. Mitch spun around. Before him stood a tall, lean, and suntanned man wearing a shirt, pants with the legs rolled up, and no shoes. The Barefoot Mailman. Maybe you've heard of him before. Yes, one letter from him, for him, and another for Charlie Coleman at the life-saving house, he said as he rummaged through his rucksack. Maybe you can take these letters to them, he asked. I haven't seen. Give these to them when you can. The man stuffed 2 envelopes into Mitchell's hands. They were postmarked 1887. Are you sure I can count on you? I don't get along this way very often. Are you, Mitch stammered, are you him? Am I him? The man asked. Who's him? You know, that delivery guy, the mailman with no shoes. Ah, that him, he replied with a chortle. Yes, I'm the mailman. Ed Hamilton's my name. And who might you be? I'm Mitch. I've heard of you. You walk a long distance with no shoes just to deliver the mail. Mitch said excitedly. Well, howdy, Mitch, Ed replied with a firm handshake. Yep, this is my route. Palm Beach to Miami. It's nearly 70 miles in all. I walk about 40 of them, sail the rest. I row some. Like down south here at the New River Inlet. I can't walk across that, can I? No, sir. I have to use a boat to get across. Same thing at Hillsborough Inlet. When I row, it gives me a chance to rest my feet. He wiggled his toes into the sand. I usually spend the night at the life-saving house before heading to Lemon City, but I'm going to try to make it a bit further on this trip. Ed threw his knapsack over his shoulder. You can walk with me if you want. Want to come along with me to Lemon City? And I've got a picture here of the Barefoot Mailman and some of the dangers he may have encountered on his route. You see, there he is rowing his boat, and look in the foreground. What is that? An alligator. We're going to learn more about that a little later. Mitch felt a firm hand on his shoulder. Mitchell, where have you been? Mrs. Jennings asked firmly. You have to stay with the group. Your pop-up thought you were with the others outside the art studio, but here you are, all by yourself. Where's your partner, Billy? Mitch turned and looked beside him. Outside the art studio? What art studio? See what happens when you don't pay attention? Mr. Bartlett had an art studio, and we're all on our way to see it. You come too. She guided Mitch through the open courtyard. Mitch turned back, looking for Ed Hamilton. He couldn't see him, so he raised his arm and waved. What are you doing? Mrs. Jennings asked. Swatting at mosquitoes? No, just saying goodbye. Mitch quickly caught up with Pop-Up and the others as they gathered in the courtyard. Guess what? Guess what I saw, he whispered to Pop-Up so the others wouldn't hear. You'll never guess. Well, who was it? Pop-Up answered. You've been gone a very long time. Mr. Birch, Big Boss, and his daughter Helen. I met them. And then I saw the mailman with no shoes. I see. Big Boss and a mailman without shoes. And where did you meet them? Pop-Up questioned. Right over there. Mitch looked Pop-Up square in the eyes. You saw all of that, did you? You saw them here today? Yes, Pop-Up, I did just now. Mitch soon realized what he was saying. He saw the kids lining up at the art studio door. I guess it sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? I guess it sounds impossible. Well, anything's possible when you have these, Mitchell. Pop-Up tapped on the binoculars. Remember when I told you to look carefully and you would see things that no one else could see? He winked at Mitch. Those binoculars have always been magical. We're going to go into a very special room here at Bonnet House, Mr. Bartlett's art studio. We must be careful not to touch or disturb anything here. His studio has been left pretty much as it was when he painted here. She opened the large wooden door to the studio and the group fanned out inside. The walls were 2 stories high, covered with vivid paintings. There was art everywhere, sitting on easels, leaning up against the walls, stacked in groups. Frederick Bartlett, one of 4 children, was raised in a family that was very interested in the arts. In the late 1890s, Mr. Bartlett studied painting in Europe and held apprenticeships under the master painters, Mrs. Schuyler explained. and at the age of 23, he studied abroad and received his degree from the prestigious Royal Academy in Munich, Germany. I've been there. When Mr. Bartlett returned to his hometown of Chicago, he found great success creating mural designs. He soon learned to blend his painting skill with architectural design that led him to creating beautiful stained glass windows. Today, his work can be seen in churches and universities throughout Chicago, and that's where he was from. And here's a picture of Frederick's art studio at Bonnet House, pretty much the way it looks today. And if you go to the Bonnet House, you'll see the studio looking just like that. And you can see all of his brushes and his paints and his palettes just the way they were when he left them. Mrs. Schuyler directed the students' attention to a painting near the large windows. In this oil painting, we can see how Mr. Bartlett incorporated a style called Impressionism. Impressionism uses the movement of light to capture fleeting moments in time. Notice how Mr. Bartlett uses light and shadow to capture energy. We can feel the dances in this painting are frozen in a period of time. Now, of course, Mr. Bartlett's paintings were beautifully colorful, and I had to use black and white paintings in my book. But if you go to Bonnet House or on their website, you can see some of these beautiful paintings. She then led the group to another painting. This style of painting is different. Here we see what is called Post-Impressionism. Using this style, Mr. Bartlett incorporates color and shape to create the mood. Look at the structured geometric style. The bright colors and strong shapes express energy. And again, this is black and white, but the original has beautiful colors. I hope you'll go to Bonnet House to see some of these beautiful paintings. There's another painting I'd like you to see, Mrs. Schuyler said. It's one of my favorites. Follow me and we'll have a look. Can you see the difference in Mr. Bartlett's style and technique? This piece is more abstract, more whimsical. The forms and shapes are looser and interact with one another playfully. As we've seen on our tour, Mr. Bartlett incorporated this style throughout Bonnet House by painting murals and walls on the ceilings and breezeways. And this is definitely a painting that you can see when you go to visit Bonnet House. I particularly like that one. As Mrs. Schuyler gathered the group in the courtyard outside the art studio, Mitch lagged behind, of course. He was interested in Frederick's palette on which he mixed his paints. Frederick's brushes were all there too. It was as if he had stepped out for a while and would be back at any moment. On the far wall was a loft that was painted to look like a balcony. Remember, when we paint something to look real, it's trompe l'oeil, to fool the eye. Mitch wanted to see what was up there, but a rope with a keep out sign told him he better not. I know, he thought, I'll use these to see what's up there. He held pop-up binoculars to his eyes and adjusted the focus. He saw some wooden frames and rolls of canvas, an old trunk, and more frames. And here's another shot of Frederick's studio. And this is the way it looks today. Well, boy, what are you looking for? Mitch spun around quickly. Sorry, got a little itch. Need canvas? I might be able to help you out, spoke a man with dark hair and a trim mustache. I always have a few extra left on the rolls. You can put a few coats of gesso on it to seal it, to prime it, and make the paint stick better. The man walked over to the back corner and pulled out a roll of light-colored canvas material. How much do you need? I like the weight of this canvas and the weave. Mitch watched with his mouth open. How'd you get in here anyway? Are you a friend of Hugh's? I was just going to... Mitch was caught off guard. And my friends, they're over, he pointed out the large pane windows. I know, Hugh. Big Boss sent you. Go see Frederick, he said. He's got plenty of art supplies for you to mess with. Well, it's okay. I don't really mind. I've been teaching Evelyn to paint, giving her a few pointers. Maybe you can join her. She's a natural. You're Frederick, aren't you? Frederick Bartlett. You're the artist, Mitchell gasped. Well, who did you think you'd find in my studio? Frederick replied. Well, I need to... I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Bartlett. Mitch hurried toward the door. Hey, there's no need to run off. Let me get you what you came for. Do you need pigments too? Frederick rummaged around on a large wooden table, scattered with paints and brushes and solvents. Give me a hand. I'll get you set up. And this is Frederick Bartlett. This is actually a painting of Frederick Bartlett done by his wife. And we're going to learn more about her shortly. As Mitch tried to help Frederick with the supplies, the binoculars landed against the table with a thud. Oh, here, let me help you. Those binoculars look a little heavy. Frederick slipped the binoculars from Mitchell's neck and placed them on the table. There, that's better, he said as he sorted through his art supplies. Say, you haven't given me your name. I'm Mitch, Mitchell Andrews. Friends call me Mitch, but my mom calls me Mitchell. Okay, Mitch, it is. Funny Hugh didn't mention a Mitchell coming by today, but no matter. It's good to have company once in a while. Painting can be rather lonely without companionship. That's why it will be great when Evelyn sets up here. Evelyn? Who's Evelyn? Mitch said. My wife, Evelyn. She's really quite a talent. Such a quick study. Oh, Mitch sighed with a confused look. Did you meet Evelyn on your way in? She might be on the upper porch. She enjoys that view very much. She may have spotted you coming up the path. But I thought, I heard, didn't you marry Helen Birch? Mr. Birch's daughter? Oh, yes, Frederick paused. I suppose Hugh must have told you that. Yes, Mitch, Helen was a fine young woman. We shared an interest in art and expected to have a long, wonderful life together. And her father gave us this beautiful property. Frederick stared blankly at the floor. Sad. So very sad. We'd been married only 6 years when we learned that she had cancer. We did all we could do. We got her to the best doctors, the very latest treatment, but fate stepped ahead of us. Dear, sweet Helen. I'm sorry, Mr. Bartlett. I didn't know. I knew. Oh, I should learn to keep my mouth shut, Mitch said solemnly. He tried to change the subject. You sure have a lot of paintings in here, he continued. You must be the best artist around. Well, Miss, like that. Sometimes I'm asked whether I'm an artist or an art collector. I say I'm really a collector. It's a habit, a disease with me. I can't help buying curios, antiquities, works of art, even when I don't have a place to put them. He knelt down next to Mitch. Helen and I love to collect art. I store some. I weed out about half in favor of better pieces. I exchange them. I sift. I sell. And then, well, I go to work and collect more. Just then a door opened and sunlight broke into the room. A young woman wearing a wide-brimmed hat, carrying a beautiful orchid, entered the studio. Look, Frederick. Isn't it fantastic? She exclaimed. Her bright eyes caught Mitchell. Well, I didn't know you had a guest today. I'm Evelyn, she said as she extended her hand. Will you be staying for lunch? This is Mitch, Frederick interrupted. Hugh sent him over to borrow a few things. Well, Mitch, will you be lunching with us? We usually take lunch by the pond. Are you able to stay? Is Hugh expecting you to come back shortly? Mitch stared out of the window looking for his classmates. They were nowhere to be seen. Well, thanks, Mr. Bartlett, but I think I should be going now, he said. Pop-Up is probably out there somewhere looking for me. Pop-Up, is that what you call old Hugh? Pop-Up? I thought his nickname was Big Boss. Frederick chuckled. He's quite a character, isn't he? Will you run along and say hi to Pop-Up for us, and we'll look for you to come by another day. Goodbye, Mitchell. We enjoyed meeting you, Evelyn said as she opened the studio door. Mitch said goodbye, and he wandered into the bright light of the courtyard, a bit confused. Here's a picture of Evelyn Bartlett. I'm going to put it over here. Oh, you can see the wind caught that one. What happened, he wondered, but before he had time to think, Billy came up behind him. Boo, he yelled. Mitch cleared about 3 feet of air. Ha, you look like you saw a ghost. Mitchell's eyes were as big as frisbees, and Billy laughed. You're a scaredy cat. Come on, Mitch, we're going to see more of the house. This place is so cool. They've got monkeys and parrots and all kinds of stuff. Mitch and Billy caught up with the group on the porch, where Mrs. Schuyler was continuing her tour. Mrs. Bartlett brought her special style and grace to Bonnet House, she said. On this 35-acre property, she knew where every plant, every ornament, every tile was bought and placed. She was a passionate orchid collector, and the varieties she left to Bonnet House make up a very unique collection. We have visitors who come from all over the world to see them. But Mrs. Bartlett had a great love of animals, too. Did you know that we have a small zoo here? We have beautiful swans that swim in the lily pond, and tortoises, and manatees, and we can't forget the wild squirrel monkeys that live up in the trees. Mitch and Billy scanned the trees for monkeys. What are you looking for, Mitchell? Rachel chimed in. If you do see a monkey, it'll be like looking in a mirror. She turned away in a huff. Follow me, students, Mrs. Schuyler continued. I want to show you a very special room. She led the group along the walkway into the art gallery. And here's a painting done by Mrs. Bartlett. Again, these would be in color when you go to Bonnet House, or if you go on the Bonnet House website, you can see these beautiful paintings in color. But unfortunately, my book is in black and white. Not long after Evelyn married Frederick, she took up painting and learned very quickly. With Mrs. Bartlett's encouragement, she advanced from watercolors to oils and developed a style all her own. As you'll see, she enjoyed painting portraits and still life, many that featured flowers and plants. The group followed Mrs. Schuyler into the studio and began to fan out. Mitchell lagged behind. He was determined to get a good look at those monkeys. He reached for the binoculars. What how did, uh-oh, the binoculars were no longer around his neck. What did I do with them? He began to breathe heavily. He grabbed Billy by the collar of her shirt. Hey, Billy, have you seen my binoculars? Billy shook his head. No. But what could have happened to them? Where could I have left them? Mitch headed toward the gallery door and sneaked out without Mrs. Jennings noticing. I can't tell Papa I lost his binoculars. He thought aloud. Where could I have left them? He wrinkled his forehead, squinted his eyes, and squeezed his memory. I have to remember. We walked to the art gallery, from the garden, to the studio, to the... Wait, the art gallery. Mr. Bartlett had put them on a supply table in the art studio. He crept down and did a duck walk across the lawn toward Frederick's studio, hoping that no one would see him trying to get away. And luckily, no one did. The large wooden doors to the art studio were closed. Mitch slowly pulled them open with a large creak. The lights were off, but the large windows let in plenty of sunshine. He made his way to the table that held Frederick's painter supply, paint tubes and brushes and palettes. Where are they? Mitch wondered. He scanned around the studio. Where could Mr. Bartlett have put them? He hunted like a hound dog, but he could find no trace of his binoculars. Hello? Are you lost? Separated from your class? I saw the doors were open. I'm sorry, but you can't be in here without your tour guide. I was looking for something. I left something in here, something very important, Mitch stammered. Oh, well, then let me help. I'm Mrs. Skotanis. I work here at Bonnet House. She gave Mitch a warm smile. Now tell me, what did you lose? Binoculars. I lost my Pop-Up's binoculars. They're black and they're kind of heavy, and they have a case and a leather strap, Mitch explained. When I was in here, Mr. Bartlett took them and put them on his work table. Mr. Bartlett took them? Mrs. Skotanis replied with surprise. You must be a little confused. You mean you put them on Mr. Bartlett's table, she laughed. Just a little confused. Your head must be swimming with everything you've learned here. Mitch thought for a second. Oh, of course, he said to himself. How could it have been Mr. Bartlett? Well, you're right. I must be confused. He shook his head like a dog shaking off bathwater. Mr. Bartlett took them, and I took them off, and then I put them. Mitch paused. I have to find them. I do. Miss Skotanis interrupted. You know, I did see a girl in your group with a pair of binoculars. She was walking with them toward Mrs. Bartlett's art gallery. Could she have found them? Mitch spun around. I gotta go, Miss Skotanis. Thanks. He ran across the lawn, past the desert garden, up the walkway to the art gallery. Group was just coming out. Mr. Schuyler, Mrs. Schuyler, a few kids, but no one with binoculars. This could be a problem. Then Mrs. Jennings, a few more kids, but still no one had the binoculars. At the back of the group, he saw Billy. Hey, he called to Billy. Have you seen? Suddenly, something caught his eye. Two girls were standing together in the gallery doorway, Skye and her best friend, Rachel. And hanging from Rachel's neck was the black case that held Pop-Up's binoculars. Where did you get those? Mitch asked excitedly. I found them, Rachel replied with a huff. She quickly turned away. Anyway, Skye, I think... But they're mine, Mitch insisted. Give them back. Finders keepers, losers weepers, Skye chimed in. Besides, I don't know what's so special about these things, Rachel continued. I looked through them. Big deal. Things look bigger. So what? You act like they have magical powers or something. They do. I mean, they're special. I mean, they're my Pop-Ups. Now give them back. Come on. I'll think about it, Rachel snorted. Oh, just give them back, Skye interjected. What do you want with some old binoculars? Just give them back. Let's go. Mrs. Jennings is calling us. Rachel thought for a moment. All right, Mitchell Andrews, here. You can have your stupid old binoculars. She took the case from around her neck and handed them to him. They're too heavy anyway. I'm glad I found them. They could have been gone forever. Here's Rachel giving Mitchell back his binoculars. Good thing, too. Can you imagine? Thank you, Rachel. Mitchell held the binoculars tightly as Skye and Rachel headed down the pathway. Phew, he sighed. That was a close one. What do you think? Mitchell Pop-Up was just coming out of Mrs. Bartlett's gallery. She was a good artist, wasn't she? I wish I could paint like that. He chuckled. Hey, what's the matter? You look worried about something. What's the matter? Pop-Up placed his hand on Mitch's shoulder. Is everything okay? Mitch caught his breath. Yeah, Pop-Up, I'm okay. I'll be all right. We better get going before Mrs. Jennings wonders where I am. He held onto Pop-Up's binoculars very tightly. The group was gathered in the shade of a large tree when Pop-Up and Mitch caught up with them. This mahogany tree is 200 years old, Mrs. Schuyler explained. We have so much history to explore on Bonnet House property. Have any of you heard of the Tequesta Indians? A few students nodded yes. They were one of the first tribes in South Florida and built small villages all along our river. Come this way, I want to show you something. The group followed Mrs. Schuyler into a path along a wooded area. Tequestas were hunters and gatherers. They ate fish and turtles and clams and conchs. They hunted bear and deer and gathered nuts and berries. The birds are competing with me. She led them to a small mound. This is called a midden. A midden is a pile where the Tequestas put their refuge, their trash, things they couldn't make any use of. The students stood in a circle around the midden. Do you recycle at home, Mrs. Schuyler asked. The students nodded yes. Well, the Tequesta may have been the first to recycle here in Florida. They used shells, animal bones, and shark's teeth for tools, and what they didn't use went into the midden. We think this midden is about 600 years old. Archaeologists think the Tequestas may have been on this land maybe 2,000 years ago. Can you imagine? 2,000 years ago. Here's a picture of a midden. The wind is trying to catch it. You can see it's just kind of a pile of things, and if you didn't know what you were looking for, you probably wouldn't even know what it was. What will happen to Bonnet House? Asked Mrs. Jennings. Is it possible one day it could be replaced with something else? Oh, that would be a shame, Rachel chimed in. No, thanks to Evelyn Bartlett, that will never happen, Mrs. Schuyler explained. Mrs. Bartlett could see what was happening all around her beloved Bonnet House, and she wanted to protect it. In 1893, she donated Bonnet House and this land to the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. She wanted to make sure that people will always be able to see the house the way she and Mr. Bartlett saw it, and love it the way they loved it. That's why you're able to visit Bonnet House today. Mitch began thinking about what Bonnet House might look like if Mrs. Bartlett hadn't saved it. He lifted the binoculars to his eyes and looked back at Bonnet House as it sat at the edge of the pond surrounded by palm trees. Suddenly, of course, things changed. The image grew blurry and out of focus. Suddenly, Mitch heard a voice. Oh, I don't want to see our beloved Bonnet House torn down. I just couldn't bear it. It was Evelyn Bartlett. She was much older now, sitting in a wooden chair on the veranda. I would so like to keep it a picture of old Florida. I would like to think of it as a happy place for the birds and the monkeys to be safe and, happy. It sure is a happy place, Mitch replied with a bit of astonishment. He wondered if she remembered him from their introduction in Mr. Bartlett's studio. And this is the porch where Mrs. Bartlett liked to sit on the second floor of the Bonnet House. I felt so strongly about this place and everything that grows here, Evelyn continued. I love the orchids and the animals and the shade of the trees and the breeze of the ocean. I want to preserve that. Evelyn looked off into the distance. My marriage to Frederick made a great change in my life. It was not until I married him that I began to paint. So this was a great change and the great happiness in my life. In fact, that was my happy period. But Mrs. Bartlett, may I ask you a question, something I've wondered about? Why, of course you may. Why is this called the Bonnet House? I just can't figure that out. Evelyn laughed. Many people have asked me that. She leaned forward in her chair and looked into Mitchell's eyes. It's actually very simple, you see. Frederick named it after the bright yellow bonnet lily that grows in the pond. We fancied that little lily. It's as simple as that. I don't know if you can see this, but this is a picture of a bonnet lily. And they're bright yellow and they're just beautiful. Mitchell Andrews, you never pay any attention. No wonder you're always getting in trouble. It was Rachel again. No wonder you lost your binoculars. You're so lucky that I gave them back to you. Maybe I should have kept them. Her friend Sky nodded in agreement. Yeah, Mitch, Billy added, you're going to miss the bus. Hurry, let's go. The other students had gathered outside the Welcome Center where the tour had begun. I want to thank you for coming to Bonnet House today, Mrs. Schuyler called out so everyone could hear. Now you know what makes this property so very special. I hope you'll come back soon and bring your families. She waved goodbye and walked along the wooden dock by the boathouse. And here I have a picture, another picture. This one came out a little blurry, but this is a picture of Mrs. Schuyler with students at Bonnet House. The students followed Mrs. Jennings along the long sandy pathway to the parking lot. Same seats, she called over her shoulder. Get in the same seats that you came on. Bus, Mitchell laughed to himself. Bus. Old Bussy, blunderbuss. He slowed his pace and looked toward the Atlantic Ocean. In his mind, he heard Lee Weiler's heavy accent. Do you remember? Your old Bussy, your old blunderbuss. Fancy coming upon you with a gun. Do you have powder, too? We could do with powder and shots if we're to survive. Oh, my friend Mitch, if it weren't for you, I'd surely be a dead man. I only hope my teammates find water before it's too late. Remember? Mitch gazed down the pathway. As he watched the students line up to climb on the bus, he thought he heard Ed Hamilton's voice. This is my route, Palm Beach to Miami. It's nearly 70 miles in all. I walk about 40 of them and sail the rest. Then I row some, like down south here at New River Inlet. I can't walk across that, can I? No, sir, I have to use a boat to get across. Same thing at Hillsborough Inlet. When I row, it gives my feet a chance to rest. Do you remember the Barefoot Mailman, Ed Hamilton, saying that? Mitch looked north toward Birch State Park. The only building on this beach then was the House of Refuge. There weren't many folks living here, I can tell you that. Just a few farmers west of here. And that's the way I liked it. I prefer to be left alone, and I don't want lots of people around me to spoil things. Fearful changes. Do you know who said that? Yeah, Hugh Taylor, Birch. As he turned around, he could see Evelyn's beloved house in the distance. Oh, I don't want to see the property bulldozed. I just couldn't bear the idea of a high-rise being put here. It was Evelyn Bartlett. She was much older, sitting on her wooden chair. I would so like to keep it a picture of old Florida. I would like to think of it as a happy place for the birds and the monkeys to be happy and safe. Evelyn Bartlett's words. As Mitch neared the school bus, Pop-Up caught his attention. Well, what do you think, boy? Pop-Up asked as he patted Mitch on the shoulder. It's quite a place, isn't it? I saw things today I hadn't seen before. Me too, Mitch chirped. He lifted the binoculars from around his neck and handed them to Pop-Up. Thank you for letting me use these. Did they help you see things more clearly? Pop-Up asked. I think you know the answer to that, Mitch smiled and gave Pop-Up a hug. Come on, Mitchell, we have to get back to the school. Hurry along, Mrs. Jennings yelled from an open window on the bus. Mitch climbed the narrow steps and found his seat next to Billy. Hey, Mitch, where are your binoculars? Billy asked. I hope you didn't lose them again. Mitch smiled and waved as Pop-Up drove away. No, I didn't lose them. I gave them back to Pop-Up to keep them safe until the next time I need them. And that's the end of the story. But I want to fill in a few details for you. Some other things that happened. First of all, I want to tell you about Eliezer Wire and his shipmates. And his shipmate Samuel and he were the only two to survive from the shipwreck of the Alna in 1838. All the other crewmen were killed. There was a Seminole attack, and we will learn more about the Seminole Indian Wars in other books that we discuss. And Schuyler did recover from his injuries, but he was never able to fully use his hand again. Remember, he was shot in the hand. I'm going to skip over a little bit of this. I want to show you a picture of the shipwreck that is being salvaged. And this was very common business here in South Florida to salvage shipwrecks. And if you could get the ship afloat again, then maybe you'd be able to use the ship yourself, or you could sell it back to whoever owned the ship and charge them for the work you did. Or you might be able to disassemble the ship and use the lumber and the materials for other things. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Barefoot Mailman. We talked about Ed Hamilton, but actually there were a series of Barefoot Mailmen. Ed Hamilton is the most famous Barefoot Mailman because he disappeared. So the legend of the Barefoot Mailman is really the legend of Ed Hamilton. He got to Hillsborough Inlet one day, and he was to deliver the mail get across the inlet and to continue to walk down the beach barefooted. But when he went for his boat to row across the inlet, it wasn't there. He looked on the far side of the inlet, and there it was. Somebody had borrowed it to sail from the north end of the inlet to the south end of the inlet. So Ed thought, well, I'll just go get it myself. And he hung his mail bag, and he took off his trousers, and he jumped in the water to swim across the inlet to get his boat. And then he was going to bring it back, put the mail bag inside, row back across, and continue his walk. He was never seen again. And the settlers were looking for Ed Hamilton and wondering where he could be because he was very, very late on his route. And he never showed up again. And there were lots of rumors about what may have happened to him. Of course, the most common one was that he was attacked by sharks. But we really think at this point he was eaten by an alligator or killed by an alligator. Alligators don't generally eat you, but they sure can do a job on you. And they found Ed Hamilton's supplies on the north shore of the inlet, but they never found him. And one day an alligator hunter was hunting alligators and came across an alligator that had human bones inside. So it could be Ed Hamilton. Well, it was a tough time to live in that period, and we're going to close with that today. And stay tuned for another magical adventure, and I hope you'll have a chance to go visit Bonnet House or check out their website because it's a remarkable place. It's very much the way that Frederick and Evelyn Bartlett left it, and it's there for all of us to enjoy. And this is Bill Sydnor signing off, and I want to wish you a happy day. And let's see here. I think we survived in this rain and wind, didn't we? Take care.